Good evening and welcome to our online meeting using Zoom. On the left-hand side of the screen, I have my Adobe Brackets editor launched, and on the right-hand side of the screen, I have a browser so that I can see the result of the web page. I would first like to point out the folder that I am using here. If I double-click this folder, you will see how I have my files organized. Now, I really don't have anything in my CSS or JS folder. I just want to point out that this is a typical folder structure or directory structure that every website should have. You should always organize your files according to the type of files they are. It is more efficient and it's easier, and it's pretty much the convention in the web development world. Now, when I develop, I always keep my CSS and my JavaScript in the HTML file. It's just easier for me that way to test it. However, once I'm finished and I'm ready to go to production, I will move those files out and put them in the respective CSS or JS folders. You should always keep your images in an images folder, and sometimes developers will even have folders inside folders to further organize, for example, the types of images, maybe icons, photos, illustrations, etc. I don't think I need to remind you that you never have spaces in file names or folder names or in any type of identifiers. So it is my goal to go over some good programming concepts. I realized in the beginning HTML class, things went very quickly. So a lot of what we'll be doing is a little bit of review also. Okay, in this editor, I can, back to my folder up here on the upper right, if I were to right click, I can open it as a brackets project. And this is generally how I work with my folders. So I have everything available to me. Now I'm on the left-hand side of the screen here. I have everything available to me that's in my folder right here. I can see my folders. I can open them up and see what's inside. And I can double click an HTML file and it will put it in the editor window. And notice we have tabs. I can tab back and forth and see my different files. Under here, this lightning bolt at the bottom left of my editor will enable me to launch the file in live preview. Here I have my extensions. Brackets has some very nice extensions that will help you to customize your work. I have Beautify. You also can have some validators in here. So here's my HTML document, and I'm looking at child_type.html. Here's my HTML5 doc type. It does not say 5. It is understood that this is HTML5. And the doc type text can be either uppercase or lowercase. You generally will see it uppercase. Here's my opening HTML element, and down here it's my closing. Notice when I click on the tag, the editor will highlight the opening and closing tag. Here's my head section and my body section. In the body section, this is where your HTML goes. You do not put CSS here, you do not put JavaScript here. In the head section, this is where your information to the browser goes. You do not put HTML tags up there. The only HTML tags that belong up there are the title, different meta tags, the style tag, and the script tag for JavaScript, and the link tag. You do not put heading tags or header tags up here. Some people think that because this is a head, that's where headers and headings go. That is incorrect. Headers and headings go in the body because that is where content lies. All right, so in this document, it's a very small file. my body is the top level parent. And when we start creating an HTML document, it naturally forms a hierarchical tree structure, a parent-child relationship, similar to an ancestral tree. And this is referred to as the document object model. So we have this hierarchical relationship, and we can access elements based on that relationship. So for this class, we can use that relationship to access elements in order to apply styles. In a JavaScript class, we would use that relationship in order to manipulate those elements with JavaScript. So in this body, the first element is a P. This is the first child in the body. Then I have a div, that is the second child. I have another div with a unique ID, that's the third child. And here's the last child, a P. So the body has 4 children. The second child div has 2 children. My third child, which is a div, has 2 children. So this is what we mean by this parent-child tree relationship. Another thing I would like to point out, ID values need to be unique within the HTML document. So it is technically incorrect for me to use ID equals XYZ twice. I can use it in another page, but not twice in the same page. You can have many IDs, but they all have to have unique values. All right, so let's take a look at my CSS. So my first rule is P colon first child. And what that is saying we want to access the P that is the first child. Now, because there is no descendant preceding that, that will mean any P that is the first child in any location. And when I test selectors, I like to apply a background color. It makes it very easy to see that I have accessed that selector. And when I start writing code, I write one line at a time, one thing at a time, one property and value at a time. I test it and look at it. I don't sit and type for 15 minutes and then look and wonder why nothing's working. So this is a good rule of thumb to apply. You'll catch your errors quickly by doing things one at a time and testing. All right, so the P that is a first child. Well, this is correct. It's the first child of body. This P is not a first child, it's a second child. P is a first child of div. And if we look in the right-hand side, here we see our 2 background yellows. So P colon first child refers to any P that is the first child regardless of where it is, regardless of what parent it is sitting in. So here we have a P with a parent of body. Here we have a P with a parent of div. So this is a nice selector, but it's not really all that useful because it may select things that we don't want. Why we use unique IDs? And here again, because this ID is unique, it's only going to exist once in the document. Therefore, descendant selectors, structural pseudoclasses, which is what we're looking at here, work very well as a descendant of a unique ID because it means that we can accurately select things inside that parent, and by accident, we're not going to select anything outside of that parent. So in this selector, I'm starting out with a pound XYZ, which is my ID right here. And now I have P colon first child. So when you see these compound selectors, you kind of want to read them from right to left. What this is saying is the P that is a first child of XYZ. And that is pointing right here. And the style will be applied to the rightmost part of that descendant selector. It's not applied to the whole thing. It's not applied to XYZ. It is applied only to that paragraph. So if I uncomment this code and I save this and I reload, there we see. Okay, here's another one. P:0. And not can be very useful sometimes. Sometimes it's hard to understand. And it takes a selector in the parentheses. So we're using a structural pseudoclass last of type. P that is not the last of its type. All right, so let's take a look. Is this the last of its type? Well, in this body, yes, it is. Is this the last of its type? Well, in this div, yes, it is. Is this the last of its type? Well, in this div, yes, it is. So I think that leaves us to just one, which is the first of its type. So if I were to uncomment that and reload, we are selecting the first one because that is not the last of its type. This one is not the last of its type, but it was not selected. The reason that one was not selected is because we have a conflict here. So let me comment this out. And now it is selected. Style sheets can be very tricky because of inheritance. And there will be many times when you look at the property and you'll say, gosh, I know the syntax is right. Why isn't this working? And it's usually because there's some kind of a conflict or some kind of an inheritance rule that is taking precedence. So these can be logical errors, not syntax errors. All right, I'm going to comment out all this again. And I am going to change this first child to first of type. Now, before I do that, let's go back and take a look at what we have here. Okay, here we have P:1 child. And we see that it matches our first P because this is a first child of body. It also matches the first P, that is the first child of div, ID equals XYZ. All right, now these are first childs. And the first child and the first of type will always be, the first child will not always be the first of type. The first child will always be the first of type. However, the first of type will not always be the first child. And I know that's tricky. So let's take a look at it again. This is the first child. Now, is this the first of its type? Yes. This is the first child. Is this the first of its type? Yes. The first child will always be the first of its type. However, the first of its type will not always be the first child. You will have more matches with the first of type than the first child. So let me change this selector to first of type. Let me save it. Let me reload my page. And notice I have one more yellow highlight here. We are selecting this paragraph. That paragraph is not the first child. However, in the parent-child relationship, where it is, as a child of that div, it is the first of its type. It's the first P in that parent. It is the first of its type. So these are some very nice structural pseudoclasses, and it takes a little bit of time to actually understand how they work and get the hang of them. However, as I said, when you use them within a unique ID, they become very powerful means of selecting and applying styles. The alternative to using these is to create a class. Now, granted, you can put classes all over the place. However, it's not necessarily the most efficient to always use classes and IDs when we do have other selectors. And JavaScript and jQuery use these selectors also. So it's a good idea to start becoming more familiar with them. All right, so I'm going to switch gears here, and I'm going to look at another web page. In this class, we're looking at some of the newer, very nice CSS3 properties, and one of them is a text shadow. And as you can see, this is very nice. I have this very beautiful red text shadow, and I can do all of this with text coding. I don't have to use images anymore, and that is very useful for page speed downloads, especially on the mobile devices. So let's take a look at what I have here. In my body, I have one element. I have one H1 element. So we're pretty much in this document, that's all the content we have. So here's my H1 selector, and this is the text shadow property. It takes 3, possibly more values. Now, these values are not comma separated, okay? If you have taken a Photoshop class, these values may be familiar to you. The first value, 2px, that applies to the horizontal offset. That's, if you look over to the right, that's the horizontal offset. And one way that I suggest learning what these values do is by exaggerating them. So if I were to change that 2 to 20, and I go over here, now you can see what we mean. It's moving it to the right horizontally over 20 pixels. So that's what we mean by the horizontal offset. And the next value is the vertical offset. So if I were to exaggerate that to 20, it's moving it down. So we go across to the right and down. Should we wish to go in the opposite direction, all I need to do is to add a negative sign, and that will take me in the opposite direction. So we're pretty much looking at an XY axis. So think about how the positive and negatives work on an XY axis, because that's what we're doing. We're going across positively on the X and then down positively on the Y. If we want to reverse it in the opposite direction, we put negatives because that's where those coordinates would be. Now, we can put another parameter, and that would be what's called a blur radius. So I'm going to put 5 pixels, and you can see now it's a little bit hazy. And actually, I like blur radiuses. I think they look very nice. Obviously, this last parameter is our color. If you do not specify a color for the text shadow, you're not going to get a text shadow. It has to have some kind of a color. Okay, we can apply multiple shadows. And how we apply multiple shadows is we don't write another text shadow property. Should you do that, you're overwriting the first one. what you do is you comma separate all these values. Here's where the comma comes in. If you wanted to apply multiple, and I have everything here commented out. Now what I have is I have 4 pixel aqua. And let me just get rid of that blur just to make everything equal here. So if I were to save that and reload, now we see my aqua. Now notice the aqua is behind the red. And it's just important to know that. Notice the red is showing first, it's 2 pixels. The aqua is 4 pixels. If I were to change this red to, say, 12 pixels and save it and reload, there we go. You can see that there. However, if I were to change the aqua to 1, and now I'll reload, you're not going to see it. Why? Because it's behind the red. So there's some logic involved here. The order stacks behind the first one. In other words, the browser reads the first one, applies it, reads the second one, applies it behind that. So you always have to make sure that your second values are larger than the third. Now, if I wanted to put a third shadow here, I can very easily comma separate that. And now I'm going to use 8. Remember, I have to have a higher value or we're not going to see it. And let me change this to yellow. I'll save that. And there we are. Not that that's all that pretty. It looked nice without the yellow. All right, that's the text shadow. The box shadow. I also have a box shadow applied to this H1 element. I also have some other styles, some padding and widths, etc. set. The box shadow property is very similar to the text shadow property. Here we have the horizontal offset, which is on the right-hand side, the vertical offset, which is underneath. And here this is a blur radius. We also can take one more other value, which is called a spread. So if you're familiar with creating a drop shadow in Photoshop, they're pretty much the same values that Photoshop takes to use the drop shadow. So here we have this spread value. And lastly, we need the color. I like text shadows. They're very fun. And box shadows, they're a lot of fun to work with. Here again, if I make these values negative, I can reverse the direction of the shadow. If I change these values to 0, and I'm going to increase my blur radius to 10, what that's going to do, it's actually going to eliminate the line, but it's going to have a blur, and it's going to actually blur the whole 4 sides here. It's a very nice effect. Now, in order to do that, you can't just eliminate these 2 values because the browser's looking for them. You have to change them to 0. If you eliminate them, then it's going to just apply 10 pixels to one side, and you're not going to have that very nice effect. So this is the box shadow here. So let me put it back to where we were. There we go. And I'm going to work now with some RGB colors. And what I need to do, I need to get rid of my text shadow because that's going to interfere with my RGBA. So I'm going to comment out my text shadow up here. And I'm going to rearrange my comments. All right, so here I have an RGBA color. Now my text was black by default to begin with. So I'm adding my A, which is my alpha channel, 0.1, or many developers will put the 0 in front of that decimal because it's sometimes easy to miss that decimal, and that's why they do that. Now, I have a background image, and this is all being applied to the H1 inside my box here. So if I save that and I go back and reload, there's my image, and you can see the alpha channel here. This is the same alpha channels that you have in Photoshop. And you can see that the transparency, you can actually see how the background is visible through the text. Using RGBA colors in text on a background image, it makes a very, very nice effect because you can see through the text and you can see some of the design, and it's very artistic. All right, so that's an example of using our RGBA values. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to work with multiple backgrounds. And I'm going to do that with the same image. So here we have an H1 element and we have a background image. And by default, that background image is going to repeat or tile because I didn't tell it not to. Now, supposing I were to give it a background repeat, and I'm going to set that to no repeat, and I'm going to reload here, and that's still the same size. Okay, I'm going to do a repeat Y, X. Because I thought that I was going to use this same one, and it seems to be a little too big for it. All right, so maybe what we're going to do is we're going to have to put this on the body. All right, so let me take this here, and I'm going to move this to the body. And notice how messed up my code is getting. I'm kind of shifting all over the place. And I personally like having nice, orderly, consistently formatted code. This is my Beautify plugin. If I were to click, notice it just made everything look very nice. That's the Beautify plugin or extension here in brackets. All right, so let's apply this to our body now. And let me just, I'll leave it. I'll leave it where it is, but I'll apply it to the body. So if I were to save this, here we have a background repeat. And let me shrink this. We have a background image here, and we're repeating it on the X. Now, if I wanted to also repeat that at the bottom, okay, I can do that. However, I need to position it down. So by default, where we're positioned, we're at the top left. So if I were to do a background position, let me move this over here, and I were to, the horizontal would be left, and the bottom, that would be the vertical. I think I'm reversed. All right, for some reason this is not working the way I had planned it. Okay, horizontal is. All right, I don't want to overdo the time here. My goal was to do multiple background images with the same image, and for whatever reason, it's not working. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to a no repeat. All right, let me change this to a no repeat. All right, Control S. All right. Okay, for some reason, it's not recognizing my background position. This is the default. On a no repeat, that's the default. And why is it not background position? Left bottom. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. All right. I know why it's not working. This is what is called a logical error. The reason it's not working is because I have nothing else in my document. All right. So what I need to do is let me just put a div here. All right. That's why it's not working. Sometimes I even get stumped. All right. Yeah, all we had was one thing, and therefore that's as big as the page was. All right, so I have a div down here. So let me just do a little bit of hacking here with this div. I'm going to give it a height of 500 pixels. All right. All right, so if I were to save that, now I have my div there. All right, now this is at the bottom. All right, so I'm going to increase this to 1500 pixels on that height. All right, there we go. That's why it wasn't working. As I said, you can look at the syntax and it's like, I know the syntax is right. What is going on? A lot of times it has to do with your HTML. Something's going on in the HTML that you're not aware of. Just because the CSS syntax is right, you have to make sure that it's being applied correctly. All right, so what I have is I have an image down here at the bottom. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do multiple background images. So I'm going to put this image down the bottom. I'm also going to put it up top here. And how we do that is similar to how we did multiple shadows. We keep the same property. You don't repeat the property, but we're going to comma, and then we're going to put the next value. And in this case, we're going to use the same image. So all I need to do is copy this over, and I'm going to cut. Now, technically, I probably didn't have to copy it because if I don't duplicate a value, it will apply to both of them. So I have two images here. This is going to apply to both of them. However, what I'm going to change is my position. I'm going to go to left top. So if I were to save that, and now I have one at the top and one at the bottom. Here again, we have to comma separate our values. And if you don't have two different positions, depending on the way that the background image is, it will sit smack on top of each other and you won't see it. So I don't have to say no repeat twice because it's going to assume that it's going to apply to both of them. And I'm thinking that if I didn't duplicate this, because there are two here, it's going to assume that I'm using this one twice. So if I were to save that and reload, oh, nope. Okay, I need to have the two of them there. All right. Okay, this is how you learn. You learn by changing things around and testing. So I was wrong with that assumption. So you definitely need to have the images specified. However, other properties will apply to both of them if they're not repeated. All right, the last thing I want to do is I want to talk about background gradients. And a background gradient acts just like a background image, meaning if you want to have a background image and a background gradient, you need to have duplicates. You need to do the multiple background thing, and the second background will be the gradient. And I've seen it done. It's very hard with the code because the gradient code is very long. So I'm just going to comment all this out here. And what we'll do is we'll apply a background gradient to our page here. And I have already gone to the Colorzilla homepage that has this very nice gradient, very similar to what you would see in Photoshop. You can adjust the colors, or you can pick a swatch, and you can pick a swatch and then adjust the colors. There's all different variations that will work here. So here, if I were to adjust these a little bit, I'll put another color in here. There we go. I'll go over here. I'll put another color in here. Okay, there we go. I'm making it a little different. And I can have a vertical or a diagonal or a radial. Maybe I'll pick a radial. And I generally do not bother with the size. So I'm going to just take that size out of there. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy in the code. And this last one is a fallback for Internet Explorer 8. So I don't really want that. I'm just going to copy in. And now I will paste this. And notice what we have as our vendor prefixes. And it applies to the background property. And as I said, it's essentially like an image. And because we have these vendor prefixes, this is for our Mozilla browser, this is the WebKit browser, and this is the W3C standard. So there is no conflict. It just depends on which browser you're using. It will interpret the one that it understands. And again, if I want to just beautify my code, that didn't beautify my code here. All right, let me save that, Control S. Can I beautify this? There we go. All right, I just fixed up my code with my beautify tool. So let's take a look. Let me save that. I did save it. Let's go back in here and we'll reload our page. It does not look very pretty. We probably need to put that on a no repeat. However, my page is minimized quite some bit here. If I were to, I mean, that's not a pretty gradient by any means. I'm just demonstrating how you can use this very nice tool. So let's pick something that might look a little prettier. I'm going to do horizontal, I think. All right, so let me get this code here. I'm going to copy this in, and let me paste this in here. Control V, let me save that. Let me beautify it. Let me go back, and I will. It still doesn't look very pretty, I guess because I messed it up. All right, so if I were to pick something normal, there, that's normal. And let me use this. That looks kind of pretty. One more time here. There we go. That's a little better. That's a little bit nicer here. of a background gradient. Okay, so the last thing I would like to point out, and I'm sure this is a resource on Blackboard, this is css3.info. Not that it has everything with respect to CSS3, but in the preview tab, it does have some very nice tutorials on some of the things that we're learning in this class with your box shadows, other things that we've just barely touched on, multiple backgrounds, your different colors, your text effects, etc. So there's some excellent tutorials, excellent demos, and very nice examples here for you to help you to see some of the nice things that we can do with CSS3. So thank you very much for joining this evening. I will now turn off the recording.